All right, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another day of SaberSim's DFS Office Hours. It is Friday, February 18th of 2022. Thank you for tuning into the stream here today. If you missed it, yesterday's stream, we had a special guest on talking with me here, Kingfish NATO, NASCAR DFS expert, talking a little NASCAR DFS strategy with me as we get ready for the start of the season here. That video is now up. It's posted. It's on the YouTube channel. It's got a table of contents in the timestamp if you are interested in kind of picking your spots or just want to go back and rewatch a particular section. I learned a ton from Dan there yesterday. I'm really excited. I played some of my first NASCAR DFS contests last night in the duels. Did pretty good, actually, with the new sims. We are working on kind of, again, still doing some final touches on the new NASCAR sims, and then should have projections up for Daytona, I would say probably in the next 24 hours here. So excited to start doing a little bit of lineup building there. Next week, I will be likely having some of the guys that are building the model at right now on stream here, doing kind of a model interview stream like we've done for other sports. So more details to come on that, but we've done kind of the high-level strategy stream. The next step is now we'll do a stream, to break down exactly what our NASCAR sim looks like, what factors are being taken into account there, how that all comes together. So super excited. So stay tuned for that next week. But today, open Q&A. We have no NBA for the next week, All-Star break here. So I know there's 4 NHL games tonight. There's League of Legends over the weekend here. There's golf showdowns, but definitely one of those weeks, and obviously Daytona, but one of those weeks that's maybe a little bit of a quieter week on the DFS streets here. So maybe might be nice to have a short little NBA break. I know at this point in the season, the NBA grind of late swapping and things like that can start to feel a little bit heavier. I still enjoy it because I'm a little bit insane, but I know this is maybe the point where the contests start to size down a little bit. I think people start getting a little tired of managing all those late swaps. So a little break here. But anyway, we have a couple questions in the queue here for today. We'll go ahead. We'll pull up the app. As always, if you have questions for me, go ahead, pop them into YouTube chat, pop them into the Office Hours channel in Slack. There were a bunch of questions that came in yesterday during that NASCAR stream and before that NASCAR stream that I kind of tried to tackle. Things that weren't about NASCAR, I kind of tried to tackle yesterday. So if I missed anything, I'm going to go ahead and try to jump back and make sure that I got to everything. But if I missed anything, definitely just let me know. I want to actually start, and let me see if I can pull up I'm actually just going to kind of summarize this here. And we'll start. I think this is a good opportunity since we're in the All-Star break anyway for NBA. We had a question from Adam come in through support, and I think the broader question here was mostly just about the NHL ownership projections. Adam had picked up on that maybe our ownership projections were off a bit from what maybe other providers were putting out there, or maybe just the way that the actual ownership ended up coming out in the contest. And I wanted to talk about that a little bit, as we kind of go into the next week where I think people might be playing NHL a little bit more. And first off, I'm going to say that, frankly, the NHL ownership model is not something that has gotten as much love and focus as the NFL, the MLB, and the NBA ownership models have in the past. It's something that is on our list to spend a little bit more time on. But I can be completely upfront and say that it's something that I have a little bit less confidence in overall. And one of the main reasons for that is because the primary input to the projection model here, or the ownership model for NHL, is our own projection. So we stand behind our projections. I feel much more confident about the NHL projections in general, but because they are a primary input, we essentially make the assumption that a lot of other players and sites and things like that will see the NHL slate similar to where we do. And sometimes that's correct, but sometimes it isn't. And if we're maybe particularly higher or lower on a given team or stack or goalie or whatever, that's also going to be reflected in the ownership projections. And there can be some discrepancy there. I think overall, studying the ownership projections for NHL, if you're going to be playing NHL, is a really good way to add some value, even by just comparing, what do our team totals look like compared to the way Vegas is projecting teams. I like to use this Fantasy Labs dashboard for NHL. And what's nice about this is it will summarize basically, how Vegas, the implied live totals for each team, right? And you can kind of quickly see, here's a good example right off the bat, right? Vegas at the moment is basically assuming that the two, highest scoring potential teams tonight are Florida and Las Vegas, right? We think there is clearly a higher winner there, or clearly a better option, right? Where Florida is the best projected team on the slate tonight. And actually Vegas is about just as close to Minnesota, the next best team on the list, right? So you can kind of see there's a little bit of a discrepancy here. So if you came into the ownership projections, right, it's going to project similarly. This is going to tell you a story that Florida is going to be the chalkiest team on the slate, right? And in reality, I think probably, right, this isn't adjusting for salary, but probably Florida and Vegas are going to actually be a little bit closer to one another, right? They're probably going to come in with a little bit of a higher ownership projection. So I think making little adjustments to the ownership projections for NHL can be a really good way to add value. If you don't have time to do that, or you don't necessarily know where to do that, another thing I think you can do is just de-emphasize the ownership fade in your process, right? What this slider is doing is, in one way, this is saying how much do we want to value the ownership fade, the ownership in building lineups. But in a second way, it's also saying how confident are you in the ownership projections. And if you are even just looking at the ownership projections and saying, you know what, this doesn't seem like exactly what I think the field is actually going to do, and you don't want to make adjustments here, I think one thing you can do is just basically tell the builder to value this less in the process of building your lineups, and then make adjustments in a more manual way to what lineups you're playing in step 3. Right? If you have a sense of kind of who the chalkier stacks are going to be, you can build lineups with a lower ownership fade, even 0. Tell the builder, don't value this at all for this particular build, and then adjust for ownership in step 3 by kind of, maybe capping your maximum exposure, your overall, your exposure to the chalkiest stacks or players or goalies or whatever in step 3. So I think that's a really good way to add value. The one other thing too, and the last thing I'll notice here, is I think NHL is going to be one of those sports that is in general just more difficult to project ownership, period. Because one, it's a high variance event-based sport where a very minor change in a particular rate or goal scoring probability for a skater or something like that is going to have a pretty significant change on their average projection, which then will change how any given model is going to think about how that player is going to be owned, right? Compared to something like NBA is in general a sport that's a lot easier to project ownership because it's a lot more easy to agree upon what the best projected plays are. And hockey just isn't really as much like that. So I would say, it's something that I think we want to spend a little bit of time on improving in the future. But I think it's inherently kind of a difficult sport to project. I think the biggest advantage that you're going to get in general with hockey lineups is not a very intentional focus on fading chalky plays. It's just it's embracing the variance that is present in the sport, period, right? It's a 4-game slate tonight, so ownership fade is going to be a little high, sim variance is a little high, but if we jump back to like yesterday, for example, on kind of more of a larger typical slate here, I think the biggest edge that you're getting here, especially with building lineups with SaberSim, is that first of all, you're building lineups that are correlated here because of the correlation data we have from our sims without having to set rules, right? You can set some stacking rules, but the lineups that you'll be getting will have pretty strong correlations anyway. And then relying on this simulation variance, right? The act of simulating out a very event-based sport like hockey gives you a big advantage over the field because average projections, right? Same things we talk about in baseball and even football, right? Average projections don't mean very much in a sport like this, right? Like what is really the meaning of saying that Austin Matthews' average projection is 17 points, right? When in reality, most of his outcomes happen far below that. And then he has this long tail of ceiling outcomes, right? That are the kind of GPP winning outcomes. So anyway, wanted to touch on that as we kind of got started here. It was a good question that had come in here. So let's go ahead and we'll jump to some of the other questions that I saw come in here. This one's from DIY Guy. This one came in yesterday. This is one that kind of slipped through the cracks, came in during the NASCAR stream, but it's about golf. So This question says, playing some PGA this week and saw the message analyzing simulations when doing my builds. Does SaberSim actually have simulations for golf, or is that just a message that occurs in processing the build? If the former, can you talk a little bit about what goes into that simulation? Yeah, so I don't have an extremely detailed description of what goes into the golf sims, but it is a simulation-based model. It is a hole-by-hole simulation of the overall event. It has been that way, I think, at least for a year, I think probably longer. I think the golf model actually came out probably in 2019 and was a simulation-based model as early as that. I mean, I think the main reason why you kind of need, there's a couple reasons. On a very practical level, your golf model for DraftKings essentially needs to be simulation-based because there are consecutive birdie streak bonuses. So if you can't tell how often, it's not enough to say on average this golfer is going to have 15 birdies over the course of the whole tournament. You actually need to know like what the probability is of a golfer going on a birdie streak. And to do that, you essentially have to know the hole by hole, or have to have some way of estimating hole by hole simulation. So that is what we are doing in our model. I know we are taking the overall kind of strength of the golfer here and looking primarily at the course length and the individual hole lengths, and then simulating out these tournaments. I think the biggest advantage on more of the theoretical level is that, again, in a high variance sport where the average projection for a golfer doesn't really tell much about the whole story or what that golfer's potential range of outcomes looks like, simulations that can take these things into account give you a big advantage over the field. So I think golf in general, because there's very little correlation and ownership projections can be, or actual ownerships can be pretty efficient. I think it's a tough sport to find an edge in. But I think using sims is a big advantage, a big value add in your process. A couple things I think if you are interested, I know these questions always often come in from the standpoint of what are the things that I can look at to add some value, right? What are the things the model's not taking into account? A couple things that, at the moment the golf model does not take into account is the overall course difficulty, right? Or the course kind of fit for an individual golfer. If you have done some research and have a sense that maybe that particular course lends itself well to strong putters or bombers or something like that, right? That can be a good opportunity to make some adjustments to the golf projections overall. But it is a simulation-based model. So I think there's a big value add there. But cool. And then I think I have let me make sure. I think I have one other question. We'll jump back over to the hockey side for this one other question. And I think that's it for now. So, let me look back at this. Yeah, so I see one other question here. So we'll answer this question, and then if you've got other questions for me, go ahead and fire away in the chat. I figured this might be maybe a slower stream here today, with no NBA, but this was a question from U4. Looks like U4 something else. Kitover something. And this question says, when the sims run for NHL, are they taking into effect the team's updated line changes for that day to help with stacking? They are. So we pull in line data from a handful of different sources. I think there are like 3 or 4 different sources that we rely on for our line data. And then when we simulate out the games, we're taking that into account. You can actually see that in the correlations, right? This is something that Mr. Clean mentioned to me when he was on doing our hockey stream, right? You can see that in general, right, most of the time, a given skater will be, let's look at Vegas, for example, will be most positively correlated with the other skaters skating on his effective line or the power play line, right? And then there's actually a pretty big drop-off, so you can kind of see it here, right? With Pacioretty. I assume that's how that's pronounced. The hockey names are definitely a bit of a challenge for pronouncing on streams here. But you can see there's a little bit of a drop-off, right? From the skaters that aren't on his line. So I guess a little bit of goalie correlation here as well. But so we do take that into account. It's obviously a huge factor into how different skaters are correlated with one another. It is taken into account in the sims. If, for example, the line changes throughout the day, when we get that information from one of our providers here, we will resim the game. One thing you can do is if you get into a pinch, you can change the line for a particular skater. If we have it wrong or something like that, you've only got a couple minutes before lock, you can change it. While we won't be able to resim it based on that change, you could hypothetically set a stacking rule and then make sure that those skaters showed up in the correct lines based on your rule, right? So you could go in here and say, 3 players from the same. I know this is a common stack here, right? And maybe for a 4-game slate, maybe not as much, but for a bigger slate, something like this, 2 even strength line stacks, right? And then this would make sure that the stacks came out the right way. So, but broadly speaking, yes, we are keeping track of who's skating on what line for that given day, for that given slate, for that given set of games, and tracking the correlations that come out of that. So cool. So those are the 3 questions I had in my queue here before the start of today's stream. Let me look around and see if there's anything else I can pick off from some of these other channels, but we'll give it a couple minutes here. Let me know if there's any questions from you guys watching along here. Again, if you missed it yesterday, highly recommend going back and watching yesterday's NASCAR DFS high-level strategy stream I did with Kingfish NATO, especially gearing up for the start of the season, our debut of our new NASCAR sims. We're super excited to get those out. I now can't wait to build lineups for and watch the Daytona 500 after talking about it yesterday, so super excited about that. But it should help get us through the dry spell with no NBA DFS for the All-Star break here. So, but we'll go ahead. Any other questions here? We'll make this kind of last call on questions before we head into the weekend here. Oh, okay. So I did hear it's you fork it over. So that makes sense. Cool. From the name I was struggling with here. You fork it over. Awesome. Cool. Well, you know what, guys? We'll go ahead. We'll leave it there here. A little bit of a shorter stream today, but maybe a nice little break from the DFS grind with NBA on a break here. So we'll be right back here again next week, Monday, 2 p.m. Eastern for another stream. I mentioned we'll have another NASCAR model stream at some point next week as well, so stay tuned for that. Enjoy your weekend. Good luck if you're playing any hockey DFS tonight, any League of Legends. I know LEC's on right now. Daytona this weekend, MMA tomorrow, so still plenty of DFS to play. In the meantime, take care. Have a nice weekend, and we'll see you next week. See ya.